So I'm working my way through the neurotransmitters that are relevant to our health and our moods. The other day I did dopamine, and you may hear of this next one, epinephrine, norepinephrine in the States, or adrenaline and noradrenaline over here in Oz. And you may sort of think, oh, that's a bit boring. That's not as exciting as something like dopamine, which is a pleasure and reward neurotransmitter. But it's actually very relevant to our health and our mood, and of course, our ability to be able to lose weight and our stress response. So what you may already know is that it is a neurotransmitter that's involved in our stress response, or essentially our fight and flight mechanism. So the main actions of noradrenaline is going to basically help us to increase our blood glucose levels, which makes sense, so that we have more energy. It's also going to increase our ability to burn fat so that we can, again, have more energy. It's going to increase our heart rate, our muscle contraction, all of those things that you probably already know. It's also going to help us to feel more awake. But what you may not realize about noradrenaline is that it's also going to help us to feel motivated and stimulated and have sort of like a excitement in wanting to do things in our day. And that's really mainly because it's a stimulatory neurotransmitter, but it's also heavily related to dopamine. The reason for this is because when we are synthesizing our dopamine, we are using a very important amino acid in which we get only from our diet, and that is phenylalanine. We convert that to tyrosine, and then down the line, we end up eventually creating something called dopamine, as I said. And this is involved in feelings of happiness, motivation. It's going to help to reinforce behaviors. And this is why dopamine is secreted in times of doing things that we need to do all the time to keep us alive. Things like eating, sex, reinforcing behaviors like that. What's really interesting is dopamine is also going to be secreted when we are, stimulated watching social media, things like that. But what you may not realize is that when we synthesize dopamine, we use that in order to create our noradrenaline. So basically, as I said, we start off with a precursor, which is phenylalanine. That's an amino acid that we get from, mainly animal products. We create dopamine from that, and then from that dopamine, we end up being able to synthesize our stress neurochemicals like noradrenaline and adrenaline. So it makes sense then that when you consume more phenylalanine, you're going to be able to synthesize more dopamine, but also more adrenaline and noradrenaline. So that's going to make you feel better. It's also going to be stimulated by consuming stimulators like caffeine, and of course other stimulators like cocaine and things like that, but I wouldn't recommend that. It's also going to be stimulated by, of course, things like stress and exercise and things like that, which makes sense because it's so heavily involved in our ability to put blood glucose into our bloodstream for immediate energy, but also break down fatty tissue like fat on our body in order to make energy. So it makes sense that we're going to secrete more when we're exercising. Another thing that you may not realize it's going to stimulate the release of more noradrenaline is carnitine. Now, this makes complete sense because carnitine is an amino acid that's involved in the breakdown of a fatty tissue. You might have heard of people that are really into the gym using L-carnitine as a supplement, and this is why it's going to help to boost sports performance and help with fatty acid oxidation as well. So you could almost argue that it's also going to help you feel more motivated because of its relationship with dopamine. So because of its relationship to helping us to feel more motivated, giving us energy, breaking down fat tissue, things like that, you might be thinking, well, we want the more the better, surely. No, because this neurotransmitter is involved in our stress response, and it's heavily involved in our stress response with cortisol. They basically go hand in hand and they stimulate sort of the same tissues. Number one, you don't want this stimulated all the time because the stress response is going to decrease our immune system. It's also going to decrease our digestion of food and our release of chemicals and, peptides and things like that that are going to help us break down our food. And so therefore you don't want to have it stimulated all the time. What's really interesting about these neurochemicals as well, when they are overproduced and our body is secreting them all the time, is that the body's very clever. It doesn't like anything to be elevated all the time. Even happy chemicals, the body's like, no. I can't be this happy all the time. I need to regulate this response and I need to bring things back to homeostasis. So what does it do? It tries to decrease its effects throughout the body. So it's going to decrease the receptors. It's going to decrease other things downstream that are going to help to help with its response throughout the body. So basically, if you have long-term elevated chronic stress and elevation of these neurochemicals, eventually over time, you're going to end up with things like adrenal fatigue and an inability to have as much of an effect. This is where things like caffeine, of course, over time, you build up a bit of a tolerance to it and you have to decrease the consumption in order to build back that lower tolerance again. Now, one last thing that's really important to understand about this neurotransmitter too is that if you have it chronically elevated, it can actually impact the way that you feel and, it can affect your moods essentially and your sex hormone production. The reason for this is because noradrenaline and adrenaline are basically like best mates with other stress hormones like cortisol. Now, while they are made from a different precursor, as I said, adrenaline and noradrenaline are made from phenylalanine, which is an amino acid. Cortisol is actually made from its precursor, which is cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is the precursor to not only our sex hormones, but also our blood pressure regulators like aldosterone and also our sex hormones. So when we are chronically stressed, it's basically going to shunt the little bit of cholesterol that we are making or the little bit of cholesterol that we're eating and or both into just producing our stress hormones and our blood pressure hormones because they go hand in hand. This is going to result in less production of our sex hormones. Now, this is going to give you obvious side effects like, low libido, low female or male characteristics, depending on what sex you are. Of course, if you have low estrogen levels as a female, you're going to end up having really weird cycles. You might end up even losing a cycle. Of course, you're going to get infertile. And for a male, again, you'll experience infertility. You won't be able to build any muscle. You'll have low libido, etc., etc. But on top of this as well, what a lot of people don't realize is that our sex hormones play a major role in regulating our other neurotransmitters that are involved in how happy we feel and regulating our moods, like our serotonin and our dopamine. So our testosterone and our estrogen are really, really heavily involved in regulating how much of these neurotransmitters are, able to work their effects around the body. Basically, it regulates their production and their effects. So if we have lower sex hormones, we're not able to regulate these neurotransmitters as well, and we're going to end up with just feelings of depression, anxiety, OCD, all those sort of things. So basically, what we want to do is we want to support the production. So how do we support the production of these neurotransmitters in a good way and get all their benefits without, down-regulating the production? We want to eat a diet that is rich enough in our precursor molecules like phenylalanine, which, as I said, is an essential amino acid. It comes heavily from, animal products. You can get tyrosine as well, which is the next one along, from cheese. You can get it really well from cheese, but basically if you eat enough meat and animal products, you're going to get enough of the phenylalanine to be able to make dopamine, and that's going to be able to make enough of our adrenaline and noradrenaline. We also need enough cholesterol coming from our diet, and we need our body to be able to produce it properly in our liver. So we need a functioning liver to be able to create enough of our stress hormones like cortisol without experiencing things like adrenal fatigue. We also don't want to chronically stimulate these neurotransmitters and stress hormones because, of course, as I said, the body's going to down-regulate their production and their ability to do their effects around the body. So you want to support their, you could have a little bit of caffeine, for example, in the morning when we get a natural boost of our cortisol and our stress hormones when we first wake up. You could have a little bit of caffeine around that sort of time, but you wouldn't want to constantly be drinking coffee all day long. You certainly don't want to be having other stimulators like cocaine and things like that for obvious reasons. And you could probably take some carnitine, and that will support the ability to oxidize fatty acids if you are training. And of course, trying to limit your stress by doing things like exercise. It's going to increase the body's ability to utilize these neurotransmitters and to be able to create these pathways better. So I think that's really important to understand as well. And if you support this, there's actually some really good research out there that shows that noradrenaline is involved in our ability to cope with change throughout our life. So to be able to cope with neuronal adaptation is something that's really important as we age. So by helping to support these systems is going to really help you to, to be able to age gracefully.